So I'm now recording the session. My screen is shared, so hopefully everyone can see it. So yeah, welcome to the session. There is going to be a Slido, so I'll do some questions at the end if that's okay. So slido.com and the event code is 66595. I can also post it in the comments as well. So I'll do some questions at the end if that's okay. I'll post it in the link as well. So there'll be some Slido questions at the end if that's okay. First thing to do, if it's okay, is a quick menti.com. So just if you go to menti.com, ideally not in Citrix, I'm not sure if it works in Citrix, and put that code in. It's going to ask you to have a think about some words that represent what minimum viable products mean to you. Everyone access that okay? Yep, cool. Does that come through on the screen? Can you see the word cloud on the screen? Is that visible?
Yeah, you can, yeah.
Cool. All right, perfect. It's a valuable experiment, fast, quick, small, even tiny. Cool, perfect. All right. So yeah, a lot in here around being quite quick and things being small and tested and experimented. Perfect. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for that. Good to kick off with. One thing I think is important to just before we begin with the acronym MVP. An important thing to do straight away with your team is to have that conversation. What does MVP mean to you and your team? I've worked in a number of different places where the term is used differently. It's not that one's right and one's wrong. It's just used differently. So I'm going to talk through a little bit today around what MVP means to me. Talk about a few examples, share a few videos. It'd just be good to get people's thoughts. But I think that probably is the most important point for me. Is we can all access lots of information. We've all got lots of different experience, but often just clarifying with each other what you mean by an MVP is a good way to set people's expectations, because to some people it might mean fast, some people not, some people experiment, some people very much not. So it's just good to understand what we mean. So as I say, collaboration around this is crucial. I think I've worked on a very big program of work where we probably misunderstood and probably used the wrong language with our teams around beta and MVP. So we were releasing something that had all of the features, but we were trying to get feedback, but it did have the full features for the product that we were building. So it was a good conversation for us to have to understand that it was a beta. We wanted feedback. We'd built the house. And we were trying to sell things, but the feedback was the important bit. And that in some areas is different to an MVP, where we're just trying to learn something. We're trying to figure out whether we can actually build something, whether the technology is usable, whether we can integrate things. And it's all about being quick and experimenting and learning things. And it was good for us as a team to just talk that through. Actually, we're probably talking about a beta and we wanted feedback from customers. We weren't talking about an MVP. We weren't trying to learn, we were trying to sell. Come to that a little bit in a minute. So yeah, as I say, collaboration, clarifying what we mean, great place to start. A few learning outcomes for this. So I'm going to talk through a little bit around some of the definitions of MVP. How do we determine a minimum viable product? And there's another phrase sometimes used around minimum marketable feature sets. The importance of experimentation and learning. So we've already, in that word cloud, started to use words like experimentation and learning. The concepts of build, measure, learn. So the phrase MVP was popularized probably 10, 15 years ago now, but the lean startup movement, there's a guy called Eric Ries and a few others that popularized the term, but a lot of this has come from Silicon Valley. It's startups, it's experimentation. So I'll talk through a little bit of that. A phrase that we're all becoming more and more familiar with around leading and lagging metrics. I'll introduce that again a little bit, and really what in all of that context, what quality actually means. That's some of the stuff we'll talk about. A bit of a background to where MVPs come from. I think lots of people have realized over the years that actually we build a lot of things into our products, into our solutions, into our technology that we don't really know whether people are using them or not, or how they're using them. And actually, something I realized a few years ago was that even when we did experiment, even when we did try something, very rarely would we take something out of the product. And so over time, we were just adding and adding and adding and adding. And even when we started to get feedback from customers on how they use things and why they use things, rarely would we actually take features away from the product to simplify things. So again, that's a good thing to reflect on, is if there's lots in our products that it's either not used at all or not used much or not used in the way we expect, how often do we have the conversation to say, actually, let's take that out, because it will make future development a lot more simple and faster and lower risk and hopefully higher quality. So yeah, why MVP? I think no one wants to spend their time hopefully building something that customers don't value. So when we start to think about actually what does the customer want and can we experiment and can we get feedback from customers, we're starting to open our minds more to the fact that it might not be something that somebody will value, and actually going in with that more of a negative hypothesis that what if people don't actually want this, what if they won't value this, and it then becomes less about how long is it going to take to build the full thing, and actually more around what's the quickest thing we can do to learn whether it's going to be something that's going to be valuable to our customers. So a lot of what we do, I think there's probably been an incorrect assumption years gone by that there's lots of stability, things are very predictable. When you ask us how long something's going to take, we can give you the exact answer. And so we are talking more and more now, with Christian's help as a bit of a sponsor for this, the fact that things aren't certain, the fact that we do have to get started and observe and get data and talk and collaborate with other parts of the business, because it's not just requirement in, feature out the other end. There is a lot of experimentation here and a lot of collaboration that has to go on with our teams, with our stakeholders and with our customers. Typically, the way that we would deliver things for people would be to wait until everything's perfect. So spend many months building everything, lots and lots of testing, lots and lots of internal feedback, waiting ages and ages to release something. Or it was an expedite delivery where I think Microsoft always got teased about this. They would just put something out and they would fix it on the fly based on feedback from customers. So that's two extreme views. Wait till it's perfect and ship it, and actually probably one of your competitors has released something, or what you release isn't valuable to the customer anymore because needs, expectations have changed. And the expedite delivery, you could potentially be doing your brand a little bit of damage if you start to release things that really don't work, if they really cause your customers problems. Whilst customers probably understand now that software is released quite a lot. I get updates on my phone every day of different apps updating, lots of bug fixes. That's different to one day I can use your services and one day I can't because you're releasing things a lot. Customers won't always understand the value of that. So minimum viable product is kind of somewhere in between. It's not releasing things that are going to damage the customer experience, but releasing things often enough and in more of a direct experimental way so that we can get feedback from customers on things. So it's kind of shifting that approach to rather than trying to deliver on a specification with minimum effort, it's how we're trying to validate, how we're trying to learn that what we're doing in the first place is actually the right thing. I think talking more about outcomes rather than output and requirements is definitely a positive thing. We're all trying to learn together and test whether some of the assumptions that we're making are correct. And those assumptions are not just about the output, the features, it's about the whole reason why we're actually doing what we're doing. Who is our customer? How will they benefit? And going into it with that more experimental mindset. So just to introduce, people may have seen this before. So there's a gentleman called Henrik Nyberg who worked with Spotify years ago. He's written a lot around what's known as the Spotify model. He's done a lot of great videos on YouTube for product ownership and Scrum and other approaches to software development. He also popularized this picture around the minimum viable product, which different people have different views on, but it's fair. So the point here was that we shouldn't wait till the very last moment to have something that is of any value to anybody. So the concept here is building a car in steps 1, 2, and 3. There's no real value to a customer. You could argue in step 3, if it's a summer's day, you'll get in there, but without a steering wheel, that's tricky. But on a straight road in the sun, you might be okay. On the bottom, you are testing with customers as you go along, and it's kind of this assumption that we're trying to get somewhere. And I think the important thing there is that whilst that shows an approach to minimum viable product, an approach to learning and getting feedback, you need to understand what it is that you're trying to achieve, what the purpose is. So in this example, if the purpose is to travel from A to B, then the bottom one will help. If it's that you want to drive on motorways and not get wet, then in this scenario that won't help. So it's just sometimes when we're talking in our teams, talking to people around the business around minimum viable products, we have to just, as I say, the importance is collaboration. What do we mean by minimum viable products, and what is it that we're trying to test and learn and prove? Another popular image that's used is this one. So this is more if we've not made a cake for the first time. So if we're making a cake for the first time, then we're in this kind of learning process of, can we bake a cake that people like the taste of? And so rather than making a cake and then doing the filling and then doing the icing, what we're trying to do is start small. So can we make a cupcake? Much quicker to bake, much less icing, much less cost of materials. Get somebody to taste the cupcake, get some feedback before we then move on to this all singing, all dancing wedding cake. You're also going to be able to experiment with flavors that work together and all sorts of other things. So it's just this analogy around, as I say, experimenting, testing, getting feedback. What's the quickest thing you can do to get that feedback? So again, mostly in this, so from the Lean Startup, build, measure, learn. It's this kind of sense that a minimum viable product is an opportunity to learn, to validate that what you're doing is leading you down the right path. Minimum marketable features is more the making money. So again, it's just important in your teams to talk about some of these acronyms, to talk about what they mean to you. Are you creating an MVP that you're learning things from? Or in your context, is an MVP just the minimum scope that you can get away with to be happy that you've done what you needed to do and to move on? And again, ideally, we talk more and more about iteration, and iteration comes from learning. So again, hopefully as time goes on, when we say MVP, we mean an opportunity to learn, to validate, and to help with that iteration towards something that's going to generate massive value for our customers. So I'm going to play a quick video now, just a couple of minutes on that kind of definition of an MVP in the context of this diagram, if that's okay.
The best definition I've seen for minimum viable product is not a set of words, it's a sketch. A sketch that encapsulates the concept so perfectly that it went viral. Hi, this is Gary. Welcome to Development That Pays. Frank Robinson coined the term minimum viable product in 2001. The idea, at least at a superficial level, is simplicity itself. Get a version of the product in front of a customer as early as possible. Not with the aim of generating early income, although of course that's no bad thing, but with the aim of learning. The chances are that you've heard of minimum viable product before today, and that when you heard it, you immediately got it. As Frank himself said, when I first said minimal viable product, I never had to repeat myself. The words went viral right before my eyes. But just because something is easy to grasp doesn't mean it's easy to do. It's not easy, far from it. Here's the problem. We, and here I'm talking about dev teams, lead developers, product owners, even business owners, we tend to have a fairly good idea of what the ultimate product might look like. Ask us to come up with a minimum version and we'll hack off a feature here and a feature there. What we end up with will certainly be minimal, that's the easy part. But will it be viable? That part is a good bit more tricky. A gentleman by the name of Henrik Nyberg captured the difference between the two perfectly in this image. Across the top here, we have minimal, but until the very last stage, definitely not viable. And across the bottom, notice that we have minimal and viable at every single stage. In a recent blog post, Henrik said he was surprised that his image went viral. I'm not surprised at all. I think it's genius. I'm going to leave it there, let it sink in. And
David, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was just apologizing for the partial nudity in the video. Cool. All right, so that's kind of an overview of MVP. Now it's just a couple of specific examples of companies that have used the minimum viable product approach. Thanks, Sharon.
What are the greatest minimum viable products of all time? I've absolutely no idea, but here are three of my favorites. Hi, this is Gary. Welcome to Development That Pays. Today, we're going to take a look at 3 of my favorite examples of minimum viable products. Before diving in, let's establish some ground rules for a proper MVP. It's got to be minimal, it's got to be viable, and it's got to be actually, no, it doesn't have to be a product. I'll be showing you a great example of a non-product in a minute or two. It has been argued that the word product in MVP is unhelpful. Steve Cohen has made a strong case for using the word experiment instead, and I have to say I agree. But for now, let's stick with the P and temporarily redefine it to premeditated, meaning that the MVP must be a deliberate attempt to learn about the market. This rules out cases that look like MVPs in retrospect, but were really full products that just happened, to everyone's surprise, develop into something big. Let's get going, starting at number 3. It's Buffer. Buffer is an application that makes it easy to share content on social media. Way back in the beginning, they put these 2 pages on their website. It's a test, certainly, but at this point, not quite an MVP. The next version was better. They slotted this page in between the other 2 pages. Now visitors to the website are not just saying, this is interesting, they're saying, I want to buy this. In fact, there was nowhere for anyone to input credit card details or payment details of any kind, but anyone who got this far was at least prepared to think about parting with their money. As co-founder Joel Gascoigne said, after this result, I didn't hesitate to start building the first minimal version of the real functioning product. Minimal, yep. Viable, yep. Premeditated, yes, definitely. This was definitely an experiment. Buffer has gone on from this MVP to do really quite well. Its current valuation is something close to $400 million. Moving on to number 2, it's Dropbox. Dropbox, as I'm sure you know, is a file synchronization service. Edit a file on your desktop, and seconds later, it's updated on all of your other devices. Rewind to the very early days of Dropbox. The team, entirely composed of techie types, had the basic synchronization working. That was the easy bit. The hard bit was going to be to achieve the same trick on every platform, Mac, Windows, Android, iPhone, etc., etc. Given that the team was all technical types, you'd have put your money on them diving straight in. Drew Houston, the CEO, did something surprising. He made a video. The video, just 3 minutes long, demonstrated the sync process end to end. But it was more than just a simple demo. It was full of techie in-jokes designed to appeal to early adopters.
Where you'll see that not only are the changes from my Mac already here, but if I make
and it worked like a charm. In Drew's words, it drove hundreds of thousands of people to the website. Our beta waiting list went from 5,000 people to 75,000 people literally overnight. It totally blew us away. Minimal, yes. Viable? Well, there wasn't a product that could be used, but there certainly was a product that could be demonstrated. Premeditated? Yep, definitely an experiment. Dropbox also went on to do quite well. Its current valuation stands somewhere between $5 and $10 billion. It's time for my number 1 pick. It's Zappos. It's 1999. Co-founder Nick Swinmurn, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, wanted to build an online store for shoes. But would people use it? Here's how he went about finding out. He popped down to his local shoe stores. He went into each of the stores and I shit you not, he photographed pairs of shoes. The photographs were uploaded to a super simple website. If someone clicked on a button to buy a pair, Nick could pop down to the store where he took the photo and buy the shoes. What I love about this one is that behind the scenes, there's pretty well zero infrastructure, almost zero inventory, and yet from the customer's point of view, everything appears to be perfectly in place. Minimal, definitely. Viable? Well, this time it's not even up for discussion. Definitely viable. Real customers, real money changing hands, real shoes being shipped. Premeditated? Yes, of course. Zappos went on to do quite well. They were acquired by Amazon in 2009 for a cool $1.2 billion. Buffer, Dropbox, and Zappos, 3 of my favorite MVP.
Cool, come off mute this time. So yeah, that's just 3 fairly well-known examples where really we started with a bit of an experiment. We started with that validation that customers will find value in what we're doing, and then it's that rapid execution to market with a product. But there's been that validation first. So yeah, three good examples. Again, apologies. One more video. It's just another example where in an existing business with existing customers, where you can go and try new things to get instant feedback. So I just wanted to talk through a little. This is more around rapid prototyping, but again, it's the speed of feedback that we can get from our customers on things.
I'm JB Brown, the Nordstrom Innovation Lab Manager, and this is the lab. We work on 1-week experiments. Somebody will have an idea and we'll find a way to figure out how to prove if the idea is going to work. And this week, the Innovation Lab is going to be building an iPad app with customer feedback as we go through the week. We wanted to work in the store to make sure that we were getting customer feedback as we worked, so that we were never working on anything that wasn't valued by the customer and only doing things that are delivering value. So we'll be building a feature and testing it until we get to the point where we have something that's good enough that we can just leave the iPad app behind and have this new thing that customers can use. This is the world's first Flash build. It's a flash mob where a software team shows up and builds an application in a surprise location. This is the Nordstrom Innovation Lab, and we're at the flagship store in downtown Seattle. Right now, the team is just setting up their equipment to get started. We're going to build an iPad app that helps customers pick the best pair of sunglasses for them. We really don't know what the features are yet. We're going to use customer feedback as we go along throughout the day and the rest of the week in order to build the best thing.
So the next thing we're going to do is a user story map. So we're going to sit here and together outline all the steps the customer would take, and actually even beforehand how they buy sunglasses, like what are the different things that they might do and how that process might change if we have this application. And we'll actually dig into what we have to build in order to support that process.
So now that we've done a card mapping, we're going to do a paper prototype, and this is something that we commonly do in the Innovation Lab. It's a great way to show what we'd like to do in a rough prototype that we can easily throw out, change, alter based on feedback from the customers. I'll continue building individual paper slides, and our user experience specialist, Tel, will bring the prototype to a customer and say, okay, I have this app and this is a paper version. I'd like you to kind of use it like you would normally use an app, and you can press things, interact with them, and then she'll change out the pages based on how the customer uses it. So it's a similar experience to the iPad, only an analog version. So it's day 2, and we have our first working prototype of this app. And how it works is I take my first pair of sunglasses, put it on, take a picture, all right, and then I want to compare it to this other pair I've got right here. Put these on, take another picture. I can just hold these up like this and see which one I like better.
Well, Tel and Kim have been talking to people and doing paper prototypes. We've been coding, building an iPad. We take a stab at something. We look at the paper prototypes that Kim put together. We might take one at a time. Usually we come to the board and we grab the most important feature and we start implementing it. The really cool thing with this Flash build is that we have actual real customers. Just today we delivered 4 or 5 different separate features, and I deliver it, swap the iPad with Tel. She'd go and talk to a customer, and 10 minutes later I had feedback from real customers about this thing that I delivered, and it changed how we did the next thing.
And it's been really, really great watching day to day what they've been doing, the team, to get all the feedback from the salespeople, the feedback the salespeople have gathered from the customers. And it's a really interesting process to kind of come in. On Tuesday, we had no idea what this would look like. There was an idea that somebody had to say, people take a lot of pictures of themselves with the sunglasses. It'd be cool if we could show them side by side to help them make the process better. And that was the idea. That was it. They came in, they had nothing built, and they've been building this literally on the spot throughout each day. And by now, we actually have an app, a functioning app that they can go through. It's very intuitive to help look at themselves and make the sunglass selection process easier, which is pretty cool to watch.
So yesterday, the sunglass buyer for Nordstrom came down to check out our progress, and she happened to put on polarized glasses and then held up the iPad in portrait view and was surprised that she couldn't see anything because it was black. And we figured out that the polarization of the iPad running up and down and the polarization of the glasses running vertical cancel each other out. You don't see anything. But if you turn the iPad to landscape, you see perfectly fine because the polarization of the 2 items line up, and it's okay. So it was a pretty good find to be in the store, and she just happened to put on polarized glasses. And so today, first thing we're going to do is switch it to a landscape design and then lock in the aspect ratio of the iPad so customers and salespeople just naturally pick it up and use it in landscape and not try and go to portrait.
Okay, so I'm going to show you what we've been working on the last 5 days. We've added quite a few features over the week. You take a picture, multiple pictures of the customer, and then you can pull them up. You tap the first one, You can see it larger, and then tap the second and do a side-by-side comparison of each glass next to each other. We also added a feature where you can rename the picture, because we heard from salespeople, if a customer's trying on quite a lot of glasses, it's helpful to be able to know what order they were taken in, and also rename if you want with the brand or some distinguishing feature about the glass. Another feature we added was the ability to zoom. You can zoom in and really get a good detailed look at the frames side by side. Also, to see one of the pictures larger if you want to just better view of one frame. You can flip the camera view as well. Face it forward so the salesperson can take a picture of it like this, or you can flip the camera so take a picture of yourself facing forward. And then at the end of it all, we have a button called New Customer, which just erases all of the images and allows the salesperson to start with a new customer.
We're just trying to put the final touches on the app. Tel talked to a lot of users, and they said that when we went into the compare view, it was unclear where the pictures were coming from and which picture was which. So the animation here is trying to solve that problem, make it a little more clear what's going on. One of the challenges with software is when are you done, right? And I think the answer is really, it depends on how much time you have. At least the most important things got done. So this was time boxed to a week, and we did a week's worth of work. And it seems like what we have now is something that makes customers happy and addresses the main problems, and something that we can track. We have metrics on. So I think we're gonna call that a day.
The application has developed so far. Everything's finished, everything that we've asked for, and even the little roadblocks and glitches that we kind of stumbled across as we used the app during the week has been solved. I think that it's going to be really easy to be able to implement into our sale, and I think that we're going to find a lot of success with the application, whether it's via a selling tool for us or if it goes public into a downloadable format. Whatever happens, I think this was generally quite a success.
So yeah, that's the example of Nordstrom. I think, existing business, existing customers. We've got a team there that's put themselves into the process for a week. So we're making an investment in a team for a week. And I think, as you've seen there, it's immense from a customer collaboration point of view and iteration point of view. There's a kind of a sense that they thought they knew what they wanted, but they weren't completely sure. We wouldn't have found that orientation polarization issue until the app was launched. We may not have been able to find it. I mean, we're in the customer context there. We know the exact glasses they're trying on. We know exactly how they're holding the iPad, and we found an issue. The customers are engaged in that process. And as I said, you can go on forever, but this is a slight extension to MVP. This is more prototyping and iteration. But again, this is all about experimenting, all about learning and getting rapid feedback from customers. That's just a few examples. I think it's always open for us all to think about how we're investing our time. We're not in a startup. We're not talking about funding and investment, and if we don't make certain sales by next week, then we lose our roles. We're in a much larger organization, but I still think some of these principles apply. We have a duty of care to our customers, our business, our product, that we are trying to understand the value of what we're doing. We are making sure that the time and the money, the company's money that we're investing, is generating real value for customers, and we are learning and we are sharing. So yeah, we don't really have a runway for our product, but I think, as I say, a lot of these principles around experimentation and learning we can absolutely apply in our context. So it talks a lot about experimentation. We're starting with business outcomes to talk a lot more about a hypothesis, and the fact that we really want to validate, we want to learn. So we're creating these hypotheses because we're not just making the assumption that if we do something, then it will mean that we'll generate a certain income for the business and that customers will use it in a certain way. We are having a hypothesis because we're not completely sure. So we're trying to talk more and more about what it is that we're trying to learn and the measures that we'll use to figure out whether we're right or whether we're wrong. And again, we will be wrong sometimes. And we want to get to that wrong assumption as quickly as we possibly can. And so it's the point at the bottom there. Coding can sometimes be the most expensive thing we can do. And as you saw with some of those paper prototypes, there are sometimes things we can do to get feedback, whether something's the right approach or not, that doesn't involve coding the full product and releasing it to customers. So I think the empirical process, so this inspect and adapt, as you saw it with Nordstrom, a great example there of all about iteration. Let's try something, let's get feedback from customers, and let's iterate. Let's talk as a cross-functional group about what's appropriate and what's not. and how we develop that product over time. And it's all about this learning. What are we learning day by day by day to make sure that we're building the right things for our customers? So a few things to be aware of. I think we don't, as I mentioned there, they gave themselves a week. They wanted to make sure they were collaborating with customers, generating value quickly, getting feedback quickly. We don't just want to keep building features for the sake of it. Just because you've got a roadmap, just because we've got a feature list, doesn't mean that we keep building features on our product forever. The work that we're doing, the product that we work on, the services that we work on will have a lifespan, and which is why that validation is important, that it's all the time. We have to be humble enough that what we work on will change, and eventually certain systems that we work on, certain products that we work on may not be valuable to customers, or the business may change. So that's why it's important to regularly get this feedback from customers. Now have that courage to get negative feedback. As we mentioned at the beginning, we don't want to work on something that nobody values. So we have to be open to the fact that we get feedback quickly, and the feedback is that this isn't what I wanted, this isn't right, I'm not quite sure what this is. Because we want to be able to change, we want to be able to iterate. Success is not just releasing the feature. Success is hitting that outcome, achieving that hypothesis that we've set ourselves. Not being afraid to fail. We are going to do things from time to time that people don't value. And it is just that speed of feedback that we can get from customers to make sure we don't invest too much time, too much money in something that isn't delivering value for our customers. Quality is an interesting point. I think we talk a lot about quality and bugs in the work that we do day to day. Essentially, quality is, from a customer's perspective, is whether something is useful or not, whether it has value to them or not, and which is why feedback is important. We can internally build the most beautiful product in the whole world. It can be fast. We can pat ourselves on the back around performance and speed and other metrics internally, and then the fact there aren't any bugs against the specifications that we may have written or the automated tests that we've written. But there's an element of quality from a customer's perspective as well. They want a quality product to do the things that they expect it to do. So there's a relationship with our customer, and there's a feedback and iteration that we do with our customer. From a leading and lagging perspective, again, I appreciate with business outcomes now, we're talking a lot more about hypothesis and leading and lagging measures. But again, just to remind, in the context of minimum viable products and experimentation, that the metrics that define whether we're successful or not are crucial. And again, we're talking more about leading metrics, these kind of shorter term. Are customers acting in the way that we'd expect? Are people using things in the way that we'd expect? And then those lagging metrics more around revenue, income, number of users. But yeah, making sure that we are defining those as a team. It's important to hypothesize, it's important to learn, but we do need to overlay some of these measures. How can we actually define that things are doing the things that we'd expect them to do? The example I always use, I've used it a number of times, but it's about losing weight. It's always a good example to use around setting goals, having a hypothesis, and thinking about leading and lagging measures. People's weight is that kind of lagging measure, and the leading measures of calorie intake, exercise, type of food that we eat, all those sorts of things. But again, in the work that we're doing, important to think about not just those vanity lagging metrics, but what are we doing day to day? What information are we receiving day to day that gives us confidence that we're going in the right direction? Now, a few examples. So sometimes the pricing of a product, releasing something to market. I think as we've seen in some of the videos, particularly with Zappos, there was no infrastructure, there's no process in place. A lot of the things that were going on there were manual, taking of photos and going and actually buying the physical products. That's probably the extreme one-man band trying to prove a business model. But even for us, I think if we're working collaboratively across the business, and I've seen a few examples already where we want to just prove that something's valuable to customers, and so you don't want to go to all the expense of many months of development, policy change, process, procedure, to then have something that nobody uses. So again, it's working collaboratively with teams across the business to figure out what's our minimum viable product. Sometimes that does involve some manual process while we validate that we're going in the right direction. And again, it's just being transparent about those things. Social logins, another example. Worked in a team where we talked a lot around whether social integration, Facebook logins would be useful. And the integration at that time, a few years ago, was actually quite complex for our business. And very similar actually to some examples we've seen. We just put something on a page and see if people interact with it. It might not function as they'd expect. You just say thank you very much. The feature will be released soon, but you get an understanding whether customers will value that or not, or at least an indication. So again, it's not being afraid to put something out that's not perfect. You know, as we saw with Nordstrom in the store, they had paper prototypes. They were just jotting things on paper and getting feedback from people, imagining that they were pressing things. And again, it's quite engaging from a customer perspective, but it's probably for us to get over that barrier of, God, I'm actually showing a customer a piece of paper. I would normally interact with them through a polished, finished system, user interface. But again, it's all about learning. It's all about getting that rapid feedback at sort of minimum investment of time and money. Yeah, similarly, this is sometimes referred to as guerrilla testing, but you know, even from our perspective, whether it's internal teams across the business or actual customers in showrooms or some of our brands or in fleet, let's go out there. Let's go and get that feedback. Let's go to where the customers are. Appreciate social distancing and all of those things, but there are ways and means to get some of this information from customers, to get some of that feedback, and to not have to wait months and months and months and not have to build lots of expensive software releases to get that feedback from customers. Interesting example as well is the first iPhone that launched many years ago now didn't have cut and paste, which at the time for a number of people was quite frustrating. And in hindsight, people can't believe that wasn't there, but they wanted to get the initial phone out, get feedback on it, and they understood that they would need to iterate. They would need to update the software. They would need to bring in some of these features later on if customers demanded them. So again, not launching something when it's perfect. There's lots of investment in research that went into building the phone, but even when it was built, as I say, it wasn't the complete feature set. They were understood that they would need to iterate the software. I won't go too much into this now, but I will share this presentation, but there's a few links here. Tree sorting is another example. It's more from an information architecture perspective. I'll just see if this works. Just show you quickly, but depending on the product, depending on what you're trying to learn, there's always a way, either face-to-face or either through different tools and techniques. There's always a way to learn something, always a way to get to that information. This was an example where they were trying to figure out on an insurance product whether customers could find the information. So setting them tasks online and seeing if they could go through the hierarchy to find the information that people were looking for. And behind the scenes, this is tracking where people are clicking, when they're going back up the tree, down the tree. But it's really interesting from a user experience perspective because we were getting that true, genuine view. You've asked me to look for this piece of information, and this is where I would expect to go, and it's either there or it's not there. So again, this isn't a functioning website, it's not a functioning product, but the problem statement is, if we built a website with this hierarchy, would people be able to find that information to carry out those critical tasks? And again, a really nice, quick, simple way to get that feedback from customers. Because again, the hierarchy that we create often is driven by internal data, and sometimes it's referred to as Conway's law, but sometimes it's even the way our teams are built internally. So the way that we present this information on screen is often by department, by product, by brand. It does depend on the sorts of teams and systems that we're working with. So again, rapid way to get feedback from customers. So that's tree sorting. A bit of I'll put this into the chat, just a couple of minutes if it's okay, just on a bit of a myth or fact around MVP. So if I just put this into the chat window, see if that works. See if people can click that. Hopefully it takes you to a document in Teams that you can just have a look through some of these statements and just have a drag around, just see if you think some of these things are myths or facts in respect to minimum viable products. So I'll put that link into the chat. Let me know if that doesn't work. Teams collaboration in progress. few people having a play around. Cool. So put that. I mean, this is just, again, it's very opinionated. So this was kind of an idea of some of the myths and some of the facts. Again, just another great conversation to have with your teams, with your stakeholders. When we talk about minimum viable products, there's probably some things that we do assume in our own teams. So sometimes it's good, even in your own team, write out some of those statements and to see who thinks it's a myth for your team and who thinks it's a bit of a fact. But yeah, I think definitely, user experience is something that we talk about more and more. And that's more than just how the product looks. As we mentioned there around the information architecture, there's a lot that goes into how something functions for a customer, all of the processes and procedures around some of our products and services. So, it's our customer experience, it's our users experience, and there's a lots of testing and learning we can do about all elements of how customers interact with us. So yeah, thank you for doing that. So yeah, just to close really. So I think we're in a world at the moment where, with the technology that we have, with the skills that we have, and the really talented people that we have in our teams, it's not really a question of whether something can be made. It's more, should it? And I think that's really a question to always have on our minds, not just these inherent assumptions that just because I've been asked to build something, that's what we build. It's on all of us, I think, to clarify, what's the purpose, what's the hypothesis, what's the outcome that we want, how are we measuring that, and what's the quickest thing we can do to learn, as I say, whether we're on the right path, whether we really are going to deliver value for our customers, and just be clear that we are experimenting, we are learning together, and what we deliver may not be the perfect thing. Sometimes what we build isn't going to be of value, but it's that speed of feedback, that speed of iteration that means we don't go down the wrong path for too long. Just as a kind of a takeaway, so if people haven't read The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, absolutely recommend that. Really, really, really interesting book. Some of the companies that Eric's been involved in, some of the experience that he's gained in Silicon Valley, he articulates that very, very, very well. And as I say, whilst I appreciate we're not in a startup world, our teams really, we are like little startups. We're trying to deliver value for customers. We've got some very specific things we'd like to achieve. We can learn, we can experiment, we can measure. And yes, we're in a large organization. There's a lot of process, bureaucracy, complexity. And it's really interesting how sometimes bigger companies like ourselves want to be like a startup, and all the startups want to grow, get bigger, and get bought. So I think we can definitely learn from each other. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in the Lean Startup book. And I've mentioned Henrik Nieberg a lot. If you Google him, lots of blogs that he's done with CRISP, and lots of really, really good, well-articulated YouTube videos on minimum viable products, on product ownership, on Scrum, and other different methodologies. So yeah, as I say, a lot of this is about feedback, iteration, experimentation. I think there's lots that we can do and we can apply no matter what team you're in. So yeah, hopefully that was useful. I'll just go over to Slido if that's okay. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, so I guess spin that back on other people. Do people think we've got examples in our business of using minimum viable products at the moment? Silence. Yeah, so I guess that's something for us to talk more and more about, talk about minimum viable products, talk about where we think we are testing something, we are learning, we are validating. So I'd encourage people to share those examples when we do, as opposed to just being on this kind of this train of delivering features, making all these assumptions.
So just to mention, just to pick up on what you mentioned, David, our features should be MVPs or MMFs, minimum marketable feature, always. So that's something that we need to, it should be just enough functionality to get something out there that the users can give us feedback and confirm if we're doing the right thing or not. Because the less we put in a feature, the better. Because we just want a confirmation that this is what you want. And then we create a second feature and a third feature and so on and so forth.
Absolutely, yeah, thanks, Paolo. But yeah, certainly so step one, I think, is for teams to talk about what they mean by a minimum viable product and minimum marketable features, and then to really get to grips with, well, why don't we get feedback from customers very regularly, and how more frequently could we get feedback, and are we actually testing something that we're learning, or are we just delivering something we've been asked to deliver? And do we understand the assumptions that have been made? Because as I say, we're encouraging cross-functional teams to deliver value for customers, which is it's a different world to when I was a developer many years ago, just being sat in an IT department, being given a specification. I didn't always have an idea of actually who it was for and why it was important, and that wasn't very satisfying. So, as I say, it's for the team to discuss why the team is doing anything, and what we are hoping to learn and what we're hoping to gain, and the value we're looking to deliver for customers. And as I say, importantly, how we're measuring that. Because when we talk about iteration needs feedback, and it needs feedback pretty quickly. So, as I say, talking about outcomes, talking about hypotheses is a great step forwards. But we now need to look at, well, how quickly do we get feedback from customers? And if it's months rather than weeks, then can we improve on that? And if it's weeks, can we get to days? And as I say, it doesn't always have to be software releases. There's lots we can do to talk and engage with different parts of the business and customers to get feedback. Okay, do you think the term MVP should not be used for all projects like MVP winners? Yeah, so as I say, the worst thing in the world is to use MVP and to not understand in your context what it means. And we talk about minimum viable products to learn where we feel we've got things to learn and where we don't have complete confidence. There potentially might be examples where we've got quite high confidence, quite high certainty that what we're doing is correct. So we always have to balance the cost and the time spent experimenting versus just getting something out there. But that's not something I can tell you. That is definitely context, project specific. I think all we are just trying to get you to think about is even in a project world, we tend to make assumptions that we haven't validated. So the most important thing you can do is to talk about those assumptions. There's an assumption that we do something and it's of value to someone, that it works, that it does certain things in a certain way, and that's an assumption. It's not fact. But yeah, as I say, you don't want to force some of these things to have a minimum viable product. And as I said at the beginning, a minimum viable product is not just a stripped away, reduced minimum amount of scope. When we talk about minimum marketable features, as Paolo said, we're doing all these things on the basis that we're going to do something and we're going to learn something. And if we don't feel we've got anything to learn, then maybe some of these things are adding delay that we don't otherwise need. But I think in most things that we do now, most things, there's always something that we're assuming that might not be correct, that could potentially impact the value that we deliver for a customer. But if we're certain, then these things are adding delay that maybe we don't need to incur. Yeah, I think it's a similar question around NFP and with the scope being known. I think whatever we're doing, whether it is the customer facing user experience, whether it's the way that we're moving data around, whether it's the way that we're integrating things, it's through all of those things that we have to think about what is it that's certain and what is it that we're not certain about, and then turn that into that experiment. Again, it might not be customer facing, but if two systems have never spoken to each other before, if we've never transferred information between two places before, what's the minimum thing we can do to validate whether that's going to work or not? We talk about, we use different words in this agile world around Scrum and agile, that we still don't get away from the fact that we're doing things, we're changing technology, and we have risk, we have dependency, and we still have those things. So everything we're doing really is to reduce risk, remove dependency, and there's always a risk that things won't work. So it's rather than just putting on a risk log and wait to the end of the project and hoping it gets sorted, we want to put those risks up on the wall at the beginning. I always like to say that an agile team is almost red when it starts, and it needs to make itself green, as opposed to a traditional project that starts green and goes red if it only really has to, because the project works typically in a time box, and we hope that we can always get something sorted. We want to flip that on its head. We start with the lowest amount of information, the least amount of confidence that things will work, and what are the things that we can do at all levels to validate our assumptions, to remove or reduce our risk. All right, any other questions? As I said, I would definitely encourage around minimum viable products, talk with your team, talk through what MVP means to you. Cool. Right, a few questions on the screen. Dennis? Hey, Dennis.
Yeah, a question, a comment, David. I think your presentation has been really, really useful. Actually, it's real good, thought-provoking stuff. Actually, so that's brilliant. I guess one of the things I'm thinking about as you're going through the stuff today, I think we'd probably all like to be doing the Nordstrom stuff. Let's do that tomorrow. Go into customers and just do stuff, and it's kind of like feels like the real fun stuff to be you're right there in front of the customers. I guess there's also, I'm just kind of thinking about, there's an element of stuff that we get given to do, which, I mean, maybe this goes to what you were just talking about, where when you were a programmer, they just said, I was just asked to do something. So there is something about, I want this feature or I want this function. This is what we just need to deliver. And there's an element of that in our world. I'm also kind of thinking about, in terms of the customer, I guess just in terms of the projects that we're working on, is there a different customer view that comes into it? So, you know, I might say that at the moment, if I'm thinking about from an NFP perspective, actually my customers are the border management. I'm not actually yet reaching even dealers, or I'm not reaching real customers. So is our minimum viable product meeting the expectations of the customer who I might think is the customer today? And that might be similar in some of our brand deliverables that we have to do as well. Do we bring a brand director on an MVP journey that again is not, okay, this is what you're going to get, all that you want today, but you've got to wait this long for it, or we bring you on this journey with us? So I think I'm just thinking about different ways that you can interpret this, maybe in different things that we're doing. And I might be off track with that, but just thinking about how I take it and apply it into our world.
Yeah, I think it's, I think you always, whenever you talk about the kind of the startup environment, the extreme getting out and iterating something on building it, you know, in a few minutes, you probably demoralize a lot of people, because we're not in that world. It's not realistic. And you're absolutely right. I think the main thing is just to have the conversations. To have the first conversation is, what do we mean by MVP? Does everyone have the same understanding of what we mean by an MVP? That's always an important start. And yeah, I think again, it's down to assumptions. We're validating assumptions, really. What assumptions have we made, and how can we make them transparent, and how can we test them? I think in anything that we do, somebody somewhere has made an assumption, how complicated something's going to be, when it might be ready, who might use it. And sometimes just to get those assumptions up on the wall, and just to be clear whether we've validated them or not. And just to accept that fact that we are learning things, we don't know everything at the beginning, is important. But we are different teams, different systems, different customers. We're going to be applying it in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
Okay,
thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Andy?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for that, David. That was really interesting. I like the videos, and it got me thinking about MVPs within BWFS, and that question around, can we apply any context to what goes on within our organization? And I'm wondering, Dennis, whether this is a rhetorical question, whether NFP's MVP is an MVP based on some of the videos we just saw around experimentation. But I think there are some examples within our organization where, correct me if I'm wrong for the guys that are closer to this, where we have delivered MVPs and then developed based on customer feedback. So Customer Portal is a great example, I think, where it wasn't full of features, wasn't full of loads and loads of customer-based, user-friendly things that they could do from a self-service perspective at the start when it was introduced, 12, 18 months ago. Whereas now, I just reflect, just 4 weeks ago, functionality was added in so customers could change their bank account details through that self-service portal rather than waiting on the phone for 20 minutes to do such an administrative task. So I'd suggest, and Sam, I think you're on the call, I'd suggest one of those examples of a real context-based one would be that. And it does make me think about kind of those more longer lead time projects in particular, and how we can continue ruthlessly to break those down into the smallest little incremental delivery possible, rather than waiting 12 months for delivery, and basing some of the MVP principles that you've just shared with us for those projects in particular, and trying to refine and expedite some of that delivery to test what's out there.
Yep, absolutely. Even in some of the projects, I think talking around quarterly outcomes and starting to think about what we are learning, the confidence we are gaining, is a great step forwards with projects and outcomes we're thinking for the quarter, what we're delivering. But sometimes that is more from a confidence perspective or a validation of certain assumptions. So yeah, some positive stuff going on. But as I say, I think everyone's context is slightly different, and there's no shame in not delivering a feature if we've spent that few weeks validating something, learning something, and it won't always be having done something successful. We might have learned that actually something isn't quite what we expected. So, right, so I think you're on mute, Andy.
Sorry. I was going to say our challenge as change professionals in particular is how we can encourage the outcome owners, the business sponsors, whoever they are, to be thinking in this way. You know, perhaps it's easier for us to jump to that and think, you know what, an MVP would be a great thing. Let's try something, let's experiment, test and learn as we go. But there's a different type of pressure that the cost center owner, the commercial person has that we don't necessarily have. And so it's kind of the challenge for us is that meeting of the minds to move into a different way of working. But yeah, you know that already, so I'll shut up.
That's right. Good conversation to have. Yeah, it was an ongoing one. Thank you, Andy. Sam?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I can't speak for all teams really, but I don't think we do enough experiments, and I don't think our stories are written in such a way that we do those experiments. So similar to your point earlier, you mentioned about to really simplify things, just two systems have never spoke before, and actually what's the smallest test we can do to check actually can we transfer data from one system to the other. But what we tend to do is go, never done it before, going to create a user story. Story is going to be, the story points are going to be massive because we've never done before. There's so much unknowns there. And we do the experiment and the development and the testing within that user story. But in that time, we're not actually getting feedback from anybody really to see if that's what they wanted. And maybe that comes down to, like you were saying, the business owners giving the team some of that space to do those experiments, almost like, in a way, I think we use technical sparks quite a lot, but actually could we do a little bit of development and prove that case works, and then take on full development into potentially the next sprint, or maybe we decide not to do it. Or I don't think we slice a story small enough to test if that actually works, and that's something that we could do, but it needs to come from a little bit higher up, in my opinion.
That's good. Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, definitely. I think it's using the words of test and uncertainty and experimentation a little bit more, and not being afraid to do so. Yeah, we don't have certainty that it'll work, but we're going to try and we're going to find out quickly, and that should be okay.
It would probably give the team more confidence in their estimates as well.
Yep, cool. Thank you, Sam. Right, we are at time. Thank you so much for joining the session. If anyone's got any subsequent questions, please do let me know. The session's recorded. I'll send out the recording, and in the I'll also send out a link to the presentation. It's in the files tab of the continuous improvement Teams channel. If anyone wants to have any more conversations around this area, please get in touch. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, David.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave.